We're very pleased to have Fred's books in our library collection. And we have the latest title, the Cybersecurity 2.0. That was the updated book.
Cybertraps for
Cyber,
Educators 2.0, yeah.
right. We just received that book in our collection, and we have that ready for circulation. And we also have Raising Cyber Secure Children in our collection. So we're happy to have those, and they're available for checkout. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mr. Fred Lane.
Steve, thank you so much. This image that happens to be in front of you right now is the original Burlington, Vermont high school. It's got a personal connection to me because in the lower right-hand corner was the library where my grandmother taught for about 20, 25 years. And summer after summer, I would go up to Burlington, Vermont to hang out with her, and invariably spent many, many happy hours cruising through the various shelves of the library, reading to my heart's content. So my fondness for librarians goes really quite deep. That being said, the next step was to take this experience that I had developed as a parent and as a school board member and start to look at some of the different issues that were out there. I'll talk a little bit about my first book in a second, but I did want to illustrate for you the last 3 books that I've written. And obviously Steve was kind enough to say that they've added these last 2 to their collection, which is terrific. In 2017, I did Cybertraps for Expecting Moms and Dads, which was designed to help people understand some of the technological issues that can arise during pregnancy and the first few months when a child is in the world. And there's a whole host of different things that parents should think about. Everything from the physical issues surrounding the use of Wi-Fi near an infant, the use of laptops on a pregnant mother's stomach, whether or not parents should reserve domain names or email names for their forthcoming child so that they have a head start on their technological peers, so on and so forth. I mean, the list is really pretty amazing. And I think that that's just a very thought-provoking book and one that I think would be useful to people. Coming out of that, it seemed clear to me that one of the challenges that people were facing, one of the challenges was how to convey family values and expectations to their children. And that led to the drafting of this second book here, Raising Cyberethical Kids. And the point of that, and I do want to give a shout out, by the way, to my buddies in Alaska, in particular to my friend Keith Zamudio, with whom I had kind of the book sparking conversation about 6 years ago, because he actually had drafted a family acceptable use policy for his kids. And it seemed to me that that was a really neat concept. And so I took that idea and expanded it a little bit to include variations on the family acceptable use policy for different stages of a child's development. And I'll talk a lot more about this at the end of tonight's presentation. But the basic idea here is to spark conversation, to get a dialogue going between parents and kids about the values that are important to the family and the different considerations that should be thought of or evaluated when getting new technology. And as Steve mentioned, the most recent of my books is Cybertraps for Educators 2.0. The bulk of my work over the last 6 or 7 years has focused on educator misconduct and cyber ethics in the schools. And this is an update of a book I originally wrote in 2015, looking at the professional risks for teachers that arise from the use and misuse of digital devices. So that's really been the recent writing history that I've been working on. The point of this particular concept, defining cybertraps, is to help people understand that there are unintended or undesirable consequences that can result from the use or misuse of digital devices or communication tools. And we can think of a host of good examples for that. Probably the easiest is the email that you send accidentally to the entire organization as opposed to your friend, and it contains your very frank assessment of your coworkers. And this is not something that you necessarily wanted to share with everyone, but because you clicked the wrong button, boom, everybody has it now. Classic cyber trap. Other examples maybe include a situation where you do something you intended. So, for instance, you write a post about the current political situation, for instance, and you put that out into the world, and all of a sudden you're called into your supervisor's office to explain why you've angered half of the parents in your classroom, or half of the patrons of your library, because they don't like what it was that you said online. And so a lot of my work over the last, gosh, now going on almost 9-10 years, is trying to understand the ways in which technology encourages us or makes it possible for us to do things much more quickly and, frankly, much more thoughtlessly than we really should. And an argument that I've made consistently throughout my lecture work is that technology not only allows us to do that, but in many cases, it's actively designed to do so. Because in a lot of cases, we've got technology, and this is particularly true of social media, that is designed to engage us, to keep us engaged, because that drives ad revenues. But then on top of that, the algorithms themselves that organize and present information to us are tweaked for controversy, that they know that controversy drives engagement. And so one of the things that these social media sites in particular are hoping to do is to keep people riled up. And when we're riled up, we tend not to be as thoughtful as we need to be about how we're using this technology. So in the context of providing children with gifts that are useful for them in this day and age, one of the themes that will be running through all of this is my belief that we need to slow kids down in a lot of different ways. We need to teach them to take the time to think about what they're doing. And that's a challenging lesson to teach under the best of circumstances. It's particularly challenging when the tech companies and the toy companies are deluging our households with ads urging us to move faster and faster and faster. So these are the situation. This is the situation that we're confronting as parents, as educators, as friends. Doesn't matter. We're grappling with this idea that things are moving far too quickly, and when that happens, there's the potential for these kinds of stumbles that cause a variety of different problems. So all of this arose out of my original book in 2011 called Cybertraps for the Young. And this was driven by the idea that, or the realization that we were in the process, even back then, a decade ago now, of giving kids these devices that were ridiculously powerful in the context of their experience and individual wisdom. And one of the things that I was trying to do was to help parents understand the legal risks that kids faced as a result of having access to these devices. And just by way of reference, so you sort of know how the authorial process works a little bit, the individual on the right is a famous 19th century moralist and special agent of the US Postal Service named Anthony Comstock. And I think it was in 1888, something like that. He wrote a book called called Traps for the Young, in which he spent a not very concise 900 odd pages talking about the risks of body theater shows and French postcards and lottery games and all of the rest of that. All of these things that he saw in American society that he felt were threats to the moral and mental well-being of children. So my book, Cybertraps for the Young, is actually not intended so much as an homage to Comstock as kind of a joking reference to how over the top he was in everything he was describing. That being said, I think an argument can be made that kids can get legitimately into more trouble today than they could in the 19th century, because now we're giving them a global publishing platform that has literally worldwide reach in terms of what they say and do. So it just seemed like the perfect kind of historical throwback to bring Mr. Comstock back into the conversation. In any case, working on this book in 2011 led me in turn to doing the 2015 book, which was Cybertraps for Educators. And that has in turn, shifted my career really into the educational field. And that's why it made sense to update to version 2.0. So that's kind of the sort of professional and writing background for where we are today. The goal of tonight's conversation is to take a look at the kind of holiday period that we go through every 12 months and start to think about the kinds of concerns that parents should have, the kinds of issues that parents should think about when they're in the process of doing holiday shopping. And so what we're going to be looking at are a variety of different trends that you can see when you look at the gift guides that are available today. So right off the top, almost universally, there's going to be some kind of connectivity. And this is, I think, the first thing to start thinking about, which is that if you're giving a gift to a child that is connected to the internet in some way, you're not giving them, obviously, a standalone toy, a standalone gift that resides within your home. What you're doing is you're giving them something that is literally open to the rest of the world. And when you do so, there's an obligation to understand how that works, to understand what kind of information is being collected, where that information is going, who's holding on to it, and how is that information being used. And one of the concerns I think the parents should be focused on is that this level of connectivity is dropping into younger and younger toys. I've seen toys for kids as young as 5 or 6 that have some kind of internet connectivity built into the device. Now, there are federal laws, in particular the Child Online Protection Act and the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, that are designed to regulate how corporations collect data, what they do with it, how they use it, and so on and so forth. I will say, without any particular political animus, that this administration has not been very aggressive in enforcing those kinds of regulations. So we are seeing more and more stories about how this information is being misused or could be misused, and what kind of access people are getting to the devices. So at an absolute minimum, if you're looking at some kind of technology toy for your child, you need to make sure, you need to make a commitment to understanding how that technology works and really understanding what the data transfer is between the toy and whatever service is being provided. Related to that is the concept of passwords. And I'll give you a perfectly common example, which is to say that if you've got a newborn, for instance, and you put a baby monitor in your child's room, which we all do, and maybe it's connected to the internet, which is increasingly common because one parent might be traveling and would love the ability to kind of glance in on the child. Well, if you do that, you need to change the default password that the device ships with. Because if you don't change the default password, there are entire websites with lists of baby monitors, webcams, smart speakers, you name it, that have the default password that anybody can look up. And there are hackers who go out into the world and look for internet connected devices and just test all of these default passwords. And so this really is something, obviously, that these corporations that produce these things should do a better job of educating people about. But it is something that parents also have a responsibility to educate themselves about and make sure that they've taken care of. All of these things are annoyingly complicated. We have a gazillion passwords in our lives. All of that is true. But there is a particular duty if a device is being given to a child that all of the appropriate protections are in place so that you have some confidence about who has access to the data and who does not. Now, in terms of making your list and checking it twice, the kinds of things that you need to think about, I think, involves some value judgments. And obviously all of this at one level or another is about value judgments. But I will make the argument that the starting place for introducing technology into the life of your child is to focus on this concept of what I call the least feasible technology. And what I mean by that is to say, what is the lowest level of technology that is sufficient for your child to accomplish whatever it is he or she needs to accomplish? You know, a good example of that is reading a book, right? Does your child need an iPad or some kind of Android tablet to read a book? Well, obviously not. You just pick up a book and read it. And there are benefits that are associated with the tactile aspects of that and so on and so forth. Does your child need a smartphone in third grade in order to stay in touch with you? No, absolutely not. You can give your child a quote unquote dumb phone and they can call you or you can call them as the occasion arises, but they don't need all of the global publishing capabilities that go along with a smartphone, in large part because they don't have the experience and wisdom to understand what limitations should be placed on the use of that or what the potential consequences are if something goes wrong. So these are all things I think that are useful to evaluate. Obviously, as children get older, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, as children get older, their need for technology will rise. And certainly in the pandemic, that's created a legitimate problem for parents because so much of our educational process has gone virtual and has gone online. So even little kids, my nieces are in, I think, 2nd and 4th grade, their classes are all on a laptop. They need a laptop in order to go to school. That being said, you know, fortunately, or, you know, depends on what mood she's in, but fortunately my sister is home to supervise what's going on and how they're doing things. So that's of some help. But to the extent possible, and in particular when evaluating what kinds of gifts to give kids and, you know, how they're going to spend their quote unquote free time, I think that this is a useful framework for evaluating whether a particular gift is advisable or is not. So one other thing to keep in mind is that a key piece for all of this, and this is where we really get into the family acceptable use policy a little bit further on in terms of raising cyber ethical kids, that there is a need in order to do this effectively. There is a need to convey to children what the family values are and the context of what they will be seeing when they're given a device. And this is particularly true with respect to devices that have internet access, because invariably, as much as parents don't want to think about this, invariably, children are going to see things oftentimes before they're ready, and almost certainly before their parents are ready to have them see it. And you know, materials involving sexuality are the most obvious example. The joke usually is that parents should be talking to their kids about these kinds of issues at least 3 years before the parents are ready to do so, just because it is so easy for kids to get access to stuff. But that's just one piece of it. There's violence, there's animal cruelty, there's radicalization of various kinds, there's racism, there's profound sexism. There's a world out there that is vastly more varied and in many cases vastly scarier than parents may want their children to experience. In order to mediate this transition from a non-online existence to, full-fledged internet access, parents really need to take the time to make sure that they've talked to their children about what it is that they might see. And the other thing too related to that is the idea of creating an environment within the family that gives children the space to come talk to an adult or someone they trust about things that they've seen online, things that are upsetting, things that they don't understand, and so on. This is challenging because it is something that's an impulse that is hard to cultivate when there's a natural secrecy that kids go through. And we certainly experience this as parents ourselves, where they're reluctant to talk about some things to their parents. They're growing, they're developing, they're experimenting different ways with who they are. And so there's a secrecy is not an uncommon aspect of preteens and teens. That being said, I think that it is possible with a long-running series of conversations to help kids understand that this environment, the internet, is an entirely different level, an entirely different critter from anything they may experience in whatever community they're growing up in, and that it is important for their health and for their mental health to have the confidence to come talk to an adult when they see things. And this, I think, underscores the earlier point that I was making about this least feasible technology, this idea that you really do want to delay as long as possible the full onslaught of the internet and online interactivity and so forth, so that you as a parent have an opportunity to develop the relationship you need with your kids to cope with those kinds of materials. And the reality is it will come. They will see things. So the question is, how well is the groundwork laid for the kids to understand what's going on and to place it within the value framework that you want for your family? And that's the key, because they're going to have to function in the world, but hopefully they'll do so with the backdrop of the values that you instilled in them as they were growing up. So let's talk a little bit about some of the different levels of gifts out there with respect to pre-K. I think that a really pretty strong case can be made to minimize the technological aspects of pre-K gifts altogether. This is an incredibly important time developmentally for children. One of the things that we are seeing in terms of the studies that are out there right now is that there's a great deal of concern about the impact of technology on various aspects of development. One that I've been focused on a fair amount is the development of empathy, which is obviously the ability to appreciate how someone else feels, to understand the impact of your actions on other people, and so on. It seems pretty clear that the use of technology interferes with the development of empathy. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that empathy is not actually an innate human quality. It is literally a learned skill that we develop. And we do so primarily in ages basically 0 to 3, when we should be having eye-to-eye and tactile contact with the adults and other people around us. And from those interactions, we learn to respond to how people are feeling. We learn the impact of what we do if we bite someone's finger and they express pain, we understand that we have caused that pain, so on and so forth. So there's a very basic human quality there that takes time to develop. And if parents in particular are staring at their phones, or they're fobbing devices off on kids so that the kids are caught up in all of the technology and the bells and whistles and so forth, then that's going to interfere with the development of these critical components. Related to that are some of the physiological concerns, particularly with young children, the impact of screens on developing eyes, impact on developing bones in terms of fingers, thumbs, neck, even looking down. There have been osteopathic reports of neck strain and deformities from overuse of laptops, cell phones, etc. Again, the longer that technology is delayed, the less these are issues, because clearly the formative years are when kids are most vulnerable in a bunch of different ways. And what we want to do is to give them a chance to get through that as easily and as effectively as possible. So by and large, the question really is, that people should be asking themselves is, what is the point of giving technology to someone who's not even in school when there are so many other valuable opportunities? This is a great opportunity to introduce tactile toys of one kind or another, blocks, construction sets, Legos, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on and on. There's a ton of really positive developmental toys out there. And none of them are as perhaps quite as compelling as the bells and whistles of technology, but that alone should make you suspicious that these devices are being designed in such a way to make them irresistible. And that's not a place we want our kids to be in. Things get a little bit more complicated when we get up into the elementary school gifts, because now you're starting to really get into the peer pressure environment. And that's just one of those things that makes things much more challenging for parents. Johnny down the street has a smartphone that, was handed down from some older sibling. Now Jane wants a smartphone, or Bobby wants a smartphone, and so on and so forth. That's maybe the most common issue that I hear with respect to parents, is that it is very, very, very challenging to put up with all of the different requests, all of the expectation that the kid will keep up with his or her classmates. I will say again that least feasible technology should be the driving force here. There are, particularly for elementary school kids, some really fascinating tech-based science tools for doing all different kinds of experiments, learning about different aspects of the natural world, so on and so forth. That's one thing. It's another thing altogether, and this is, I think, parents need to really reflect on. It's another thing altogether to give children a capability to connect with complete strangers around the world. And this is really the age group where we start to see the insistence on tools or toys that have some form of connectivity. And obviously, as kids are marching through elementary school, they're developing reading skills, they're developing writing skills. Obviously, their tech skills are generally impressive. Parents often feel intimidated by all of this, and that's not unreasonable. But the key point here is that parents still have the wisdom and the experience to understand what the potential risks can be. So that's something that parents should not hesitate to fall back on. There may be a good reason. Some of the Lego competitions my kids were in elementary school would be a good example, since a lot of those now are robotically driven. There may be good examples of tech toys that can be integrated into the pedagogical and developmental goals that you have for your kids. And I'm not here to say that shouldn't happen. What I do think is important, though, is that in the elementary school period, keeping in mind the kids are basically going from the age of 6 up to the age of 10. They're very, very young. And so this use of technology needs to be closely monitored, particularly with respect to the distribution of personally identifying information. You'll start to see more and more stuff really aimed at this age group. But again, unfettered access is really potentially traumatic. So middle school, and forgive the choice of turkeys here, that's maybe a little bit of a commentary, but middle school is where things really hit the road in terms of the demands for technology. Kids are older, they're much more articulate, they're all pre-law in middle school as far as I can tell. And so they are going to have very, very strong opinions about why they should be allowed to use different kinds of technology, why a smartphone is absolutely essential to their self-worth and to their socialization, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to get harder to really regulate what the level of tech use will be. Related to that, of course, is the fact that more and more of their assignments will be tech-based in one way or another, even putting aside the pandemic, which of course has tilted the table altogether. But at the same time, you're still not seeing a significant improvement in terms of necessarily judgment, wisdom, etc. So the role of the parent is more challenging because of their greater development and articulation and so forth. But their need for parenting is not significantly diminished. And so the goal here is to use their developmental stage to engage in more and more conversation with them about what the implications are of what they're doing and what the potential risks are. And by middle school, they're starting to get some of this material from their schools, but they're also better capable of understanding what the potential risks are. And certainly, if it hasn't happened before, and it really probably should have, this is categorically the opportunity to talk to kids about the material that they'll see online, what the context of viewing things should be, what your family values are with respect to violence, with respect to sexuality, so on and so forth. Now, as these kids are starting to use devices or are using devices, a couple of different things worth considering with respect to the use of technology. Number one, are the toys or the technology that you're looking at, are they in some way artificially intelligent, or are they quote unquote smart? And this has been a real trend in toys aimed at kids middle school and up. Obviously, we're all familiar with smart speakers that we use Alexa, we use Google Nest, we use whatever. But more and more toys aimed at kids have similar technology built into it. And that requires some serious investigation by parents in terms of what is happening to the interaction between the child and the toy company. Are conversations being stored? Are the conversations being used to generate further conversations with the child? Is the conversation being used to generate advertising? So on and so forth. So before purchasing any toy that has smart technology built into it, really do your research about how that technology works. Are there consumer complaints about the company? Look at some of the tech journals out there that evaluate these toys. It just amazes me. You know, for instance, I was looking when I was researching this, there was a gift guide for the 40 gifts, technology gifts that your 10-year-old will go nuts about. First on the list was an Apple iPod with all of the computing capabilities of a smartphone. I mean, okay, so you can't make calls with it, but you can do WhatsApp, you can do Siri, you can do all of this other stuff. So you might just as well give the kid, you know, his own stage on the global platform. It's absolutely remarkable to me that somebody would hand that to a 10-year-old without thinking through what the potential uses are and what the potential risks are. So that's just like the smart technology piece of it. The next trend that we're really starting to see, and this kicks over a little bit into the high school area as well, is the integration of artificial intelligence into these toys and tools for kids. And that's a whole different can of worms, in part because we don't really fully understand exactly how artificial intelligence is going to develop. There are a lot of decent arguments that we don't understand how it's actually being implemented right now. And one of the other things that is of, I think, particular concern is that to a large extent, artificial intelligence is a reflection of the programming that goes into it, obviously. There's always a starting place for where the artificial intelligence comes from. And we're seeing some very serious issues with respect to the development and implementation of computer algorithms, both artificially intelligent and not. So in terms of understanding the impact that these can have on your children, you actually need to spend some time looking at how is the particular device you're considering using the quote unquote artificial intelligence to learn and develop. What is it learning? What are the inputs that it is taking from your child, and how is it feeding all of that back? As we saw with smart technology, some of that is happening in the cloud. You know, for instance, Alexa theoretically gets smarter every day that we use her. But, you know, with some of these devices now, they're embedding sort of basic or, preliminary artificial intelligence in the devices themselves. We, I think, really need to be cautious about rolling these devices out to our kids until we better understand what kinds of information our kids are giving up to the companies that produce these. So that actually brings me to this perfect sign on the left. There's no lifeguard on duty with respect to the internet. That's the problem, that we are really in a situation where, to a remarkable degree, our children have access to a vast ocean of information, data, interactions, networks, and people. And parents are the only lifeguard that's going to keep them safe. And that really is what led me to raising cyberethical kids, because it did seem to me that there was some use for parents to have a framework to discuss with their kids the kinds of concerns and kinds of issues that they think the kids should be aware of. And what this does is it discusses a quote unquote family acceptable use policy for the 4 stages of development that I went over with respect to the toys today. And the general idea basically is that parents can sit down with their kids and go through these checklists of acceptable uses and talk through the issues with their kids, some of which, by the way, apply to parents as well. And I think it's important for parents to reflect on the fact that kids are oftentimes very concerned about how parents use technology, that they are upset that they're effectively competing with these devices for their parents' attention. And so one of the goals of this acceptable use policy that I put into these, of the FAUPs that I put into the book, is to get parents to recognize that their own behavior has implications for how the family use of technology unfolds. Ideally, you get a 2-way conversation going, and that's beneficial for a bunch of different reasons. So, closing thoughts on this, I think that, it is clear that we live in a phenomenally exciting time. I mean, technology gives kids access to levels of information that literally were unimaginable a couple of decades ago. It's all at their fingertips. You can research things in a heartbeat. You can find leading experts. You can reach out to people. It's a tremendously exciting time. And on top of that, these technologies allow kids to be innovative and entrepreneurial and imaginative in tremendous ways. At the same time, however, these toys and other related tech tools do present legitimate concerns that parents have a responsibility to sort out. The biggest of these is privacy, obviously, the use of child-based information. There are some thoughts that should be given to whether or not toys are encouraging good body image on the part of kids. There's a lot of technology being marketed now that is designed to help your child become an internet influencer or an Instagram or whatever it may be. And while, yes, there are some tremendous success stories out there for kids, there are also some really scary implications in terms of how kids view themselves. These are the kinds of things that parents need to think about. And I would encourage anybody who's doing tech-related shopping in the coming months to slow themselves down, to go through a reasonable checklist of privacy, information disclosure, psychological issues, access to strangers, all of these things, to just give a reasonable investigation to make sure that you understand how the technology works, how the toys actually work, and that it is in the best interest of your child to use it at their stage of development. So with that, Steve, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fred. Excellent talk. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat, or if you'd like to use the raise hand feature, by all means, you could use that and I'll unmute you and you can ask your question. But that's a lot to consider when searching for the proper product. And I know how you mentioned those default passwords. There's also, I think it was one of the Sony brands where the television was recording, or it would, I had somebody once was talking about how he had a TV in a room. It was a brand new set, and it's where his baby was sleeping. And he's like, I noticed that the screen, all of a sudden, it's like lit up at the bottom. And I said, you know, I read that there are certain brands of TV that actually go on and do, you know, like they say that they're doing updates to firmware, but you know,
Right.
what exactly is it doing? And you know, that's one of those things, like with the baby monitors changing the default password, and Alexa inadvertently will say recording people and playing back recordings at times, and some people are like, who is that coming through my Alexa? But you know, it's it's interesting but scary at the same time to a certain extent.
Absolutely. No questions, dude. Kathy raised her hand.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. Well, thank you for this information. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I do parent education myself, and so I was just curious to see what you would be presenting. And my kids are about your kids' ages, so I've kind of missed the real tough part with everything that's on the internet.
Yeah.
And when I listen to you, and I think about the parents I work with, there very few parents are going to have the foresight and the look through, you know, really consider what toys are being given. They're being given by grandma and grandpa and different circumstances. It almost feels like we're asking too much of parents, and that we need to take it up a level to give parents some more help.
Oh, you know, Kathy, I think that's correct. I think that there's a responsibility up and down the scale, right? To try to cope with this, that there's a responsibility on the part of tech companies to act ethically and to act in a consumer-friendly way. There's a responsibility on the part of state and federal governments to make them do that which there has not been enough of in my estimation. I think that what is hard is, and I say this, 4 boys, I've got, was it now 10 nieces and nephews, my family. I know how hard all of this is. I mean, my sister is trying to supervise 3 kids under 10 with home education and work from home for her in a 5-bedroom apartment in Somerville, Mass. I mean, it is insane, right? What she has to cope with. And the hard answer is, at the end of the day, the final responsibility always rests with parents. That's the hard answer to that. That being said, I firmly believe that parents deserve all the help we can give them. And unfortunately, I think that requires a regulatory scheme that recognizes the threats that are out there and the need for greater child protection and enforces it. That's what I think we need. But it's a little bit there's no easy answer. There just isn't any easy answer. And I do hope that, with the work that you're doing and the work that the library is doing, and honestly, schools across the country, that we can help parents get the information they need. My concern is always just that the speed of things, right? The gifts coming in, the crunch to do shopping, all the rest of it, allows people to focus on the bells and whistles as opposed to some of the substantive issues that are underlying that. And that's the challenge. I wish I had an easier and more effective answer, because I know my sister would like one. I know my brother would like one. I don't know that there is one without, a much more comprehensive reshaping of the relationship between corporations and parents.
Right. And children, we took away, I think, a lot of the protections of children, maybe back in the 80s, I think, when we couldn't advertise to them. We had lots of regulations, and then we kind of swung the other way. And it just like the pornography. I mean, it's like, we can't, it's so available now. It is so sad. It is, it is beyond most parents to really to be able to protect their kids. And so I'm teaching them to have conversations like, beginning as preschoolers, which is, like what's safe, what pictures are good pictures and what aren't good pictures. And it's sad. It's sad to have to do that. And I just think that our government, or maybe it needs to be a worldwide organization, has to step in. And
it's interesting. I work with a lot of abuse survivors in different contexts. And actually, part of the reason I do that is my first book was Obscene Profits, which was about the rise of the online industry. And so I actually have some expertise in how all of this has unfolded. And that book came out in 2000, so almost 21 years ago. And the issue that we're facing right now is that in those 2 decades, and I think you'd agree with this, the concept of childhood has been essentially wiped out. You're absolutely right. That if, particularly if you've got a kid who has access to a device, either in the house or, at a friend's house or something like that, the average age of exposure to adult materials is now under 10. It's somewhere around 9.5. That is an epic tectonic shift from when I was a kid. And as I say in a lot of my lectures, particularly to parents, we're essentially running a 20 or 30 year unregulated test on our children about what the impact of adult materials is. And we don't know what the results are yet. And there's no guidance here. All we know is that kids have access to material that was unimaginable 20 years ago.
And we know it's super damaging to the kids. And so that is the fact that kids are getting addicted to porn at a young age is like unacceptable. I mean, we're accepting it as a society, and I'm hoping that we can change that to being unacceptable.
I'm working on one book right now, which is due in early spring, called The The Rise of the Digital Mob, which is about the impact of technology on communication and politics and so forth. But I'm also under contract for a second book called Tech Sick Masculinity, which is about the impact of technology on men and maleness. And that will be a fairly significant theme, as you might imagine.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions this evening? I don't see. Well, Fred, I thank you very much for this terrific presentation, and we look forward to the future titles coming out, and possibly, you know, hopefully in the spring, when the spring title comes out, maybe we could be back to in-person events. But you know, if not, we could always do another Zoom event. I'm definitely open to that, because you know, topic is very important, and you know, hopefully everyone is able to safely guide the younger people through the internet without falling into any pitfalls that are out there.
Well, we will definitely stay in touch, Stephen. I really enjoy working with you on this, and you know, anytime you guys need to fill a hole, I'm happy to step in and talk about any of the things that I've worked on. So
thank you very much. Much appreciated. And everyone have a wonderful evening and a great upcoming holiday.